15. Black people with body parts. So huge, the world can't believe they're real. What if I told you there are black people walking this earth with body parts so massive, doctors had to measure them twice to believe they were real? We're talking nails, longer than a car, hair, heavier than a suitcase, hips, wider than a doorway, and mouths that can swallow a soda can sideways. These aren't CGI monsters or comic book characters. They're real people whose bodies rewrote the limits of normal. Welcome to Legends of Black Excellence. Hit subscribe, turn on notifications, and let's dive into 15 unbelievable black bodies the world still thinks must be fake. Diana Armstrong. The first time most people see Diana Armstrong's hands, they think it must be a filter, a prop, a trick of the camera. 10 nails spill from her fingertips like painted ribbons, thick and coiled, reaching almost to the floor. Measured end to end, they stretch over 13 meters. More than 42 feet of keratin twisting and spiraling in impossible shapes. Her right thumbnail alone is longer than many people are tall, while her shortest nail still dwarfs the average forearm. In photos, she barely needs a caption. Her hands say everything. They look unreal, exaggerated, like something out of a comic book, but every millimeter grew slowly, painfully over decades. To understand why, you have to go back to a quiet home in Minnesota in 1997 and a mother-daughter ritual that never got to happen again. Diana's 16-year-old daughter, Letitia, had a habit every weekend she'd sit her mom down, spread out the nail file, and polish and do her nails. One night, like so many others, they planned to do the same. By morning, Letitia was gone, taken suddenly by an asthma attack in her sleep. The house fell into a silence that seemed permanent. Grief stole Diana's appetite, her energy, her sense of time. But when she looked at her hands, she saw the last thing her daughter had touched with care. In that moment, she made a decision: she would never cut her nails again. From that promise came a life unlike anyone else's. Daily tasks that most people don't even think about became obstacles to solve. She can't just shove her hands into pockets, grab a pan off the stove, or twist open a jar. Driving means holding the steering wheel with her palms. Getting dressed takes patience and planning. Even something as simple as picking up a coin from the floor requires creativity. Maintaining the nails is its own full ritual. Hours of cleaning, filing, buffing, and painting, sometimes spread over days, often turned into a bonding time with her grandchildren. Yet Diana doesn't describe herself as trapped by her nails. To her, they are a physical, visible promise she refuses to break. The world sees a black woman with nails so huge they almost don't look human. She sees a story of love that didn't end when her daughter's life did. Every time a camera points at her, every time someone gasps or stares, she's reminded why she started. She could cut them tomorrow and step back into a more convenient life. Instead, she chooses to carry this beautiful, heavy, unbelievable monument at the ends of her fingers. Proof that some memories grow too large for ordinary bodies to hold. Ayanna Williams. Before she ever held a Guinness certificate, Ayanna Williams was already a legend in her Houston neighborhood. People would stop and stare when she walked by, eyes dropping straight to her hands. Her fingernails didn't just stick out a little. They stretched and twisted in long, colorful arcs, some curving back toward her wrists, some looping like question marks. At her first world record measurement in 2017, the total length of her 10 nails was over 5.7 meters, more than 18 feet. By the time she decided to cut them in 2021, they had grown past 7.3 meters, around 24 feet in total. For most of us, a long nail is a few centimeters. For Ayanna, that was just the white tip. Her journey started in the 1990s, long before social media made viral a thing. She loved nail art, loved color, loved turning hands into canvases. At some point, she simply stopped trimming, curious at first, then determined. Year after year, she watched them grow, strengthened them with layers of acrylic and polish, and turned her passion into a full-on identity. As a black woman in the beauty scene, her look wasn't subtle. It was a statement. When Guinness finally came knocking, she wasn't suddenly transforming herself for a record. The record was catching up to what she had already become. Living with nails that long, though, meant her entire routine had to be redesigned. Buttoning pants, pulling up a zipper, or handling a phone screen were no longer quick motions. She had to use knuckles, the edges of her hands, and a lot of patience. Simple chores like making the bed or cooking dinner demanded careful choreography so she wouldn't crack or snag a nail grown over decades. Even sleep was a logistical puzzle: where to place her hands, how to turn over without bending something the wrong way. Every part of her day had to negotiate with those astonishing nails. In 2021, Ayanna made a decision that shocked fans almost as much as her nails had. She chose to cut them. At a dermatologist's office with an electric rotary tool buzzing through years of growth, one world record after another fell to the tray below. When it was over, she flexed her fingers in a way she hadn't felt in decades. She didn't see it as surrender, but as graduation. She had proven what she wanted to prove. For a long time, her body part seemed too enormous to be real, a spectacle the world gawked at. In the end, Ayanna reminded everyone of something even more powerful. The choice to let go can be just as extraordinary as the choice to hold on. Asha Mandela. Before anyone called her the Black Rapunzel, Asha Mandela was just a girl from Trinidad who fell in love with her natural hair. When she moved to the United States and later settled in Florida, she watched women around her straighten, relax, and hide their curls. Asha went the opposite way. She locked her hair in her 20s and never looked back. Decades later, what began as a simple decision to embrace her roots turned into something the world had never seen: a single lock officially measured at almost 6 meters long, with the entire mass of her dreadlocks stretching well over the height of a 2-story house when fully uncoiled. This wasn't just long hair anymore. It was a living landmark growing from her scalp. For Asha, her locks aren't a hairstyle, they're a spiritual journey. She talks about them as an extension of her life force, a record of everything she's survived and learned. Each new inch carries memories of migration, motherhood, struggle, and faith. Cutting them, she says, would feel like amputating a part of her soul. Doctors have warned her about the weight, close to 19 kilograms hanging from her head and back, and the strain it can put on her spine. Friends and strangers have begged her to trim them. But Asha sees her hair as a covenant she made with herself and with something higher, and that promise means more to her than convenience. Day-to-day life with that much hair is a full operation. She can't simply jump in the shower, wash, towel dry, and go. Washing and conditioning her locks can take hours, and drying them can stretch into more than a day. She has to carefully coil and wrap them, sometimes carrying them in a special sling or bag so they don't drag across the ground or get caught in doors, escalators, or car wheels. Sleeping means spreading them across the bed like an extra body, or arranging them beside her in neat loops. A windy day, a crowded bus, or a tight doorway can all turn into unexpected hazards when your hair arrives before you do. Yet despite the stares, the comments, and the endless practical challenges, Asha walks through the world with a kind of quiet pride. People see a black woman with hair so huge it looks impossible, and their first reaction is disbelief. Her first reaction is gratitude. Her dreadlocks have brought her global attention, yes, but they've also given her a platform to talk about self-acceptance, cultural identity, and the power of letting your true self grow as far as it can. In a world that constantly tells black women to shrink, straighten, or tame themselves, Asha Mandela chose to do the opposite. She let her hair and her story become too big for anyone to ignore. Avon Dugas. Long before the world knew her name, Avon Dugas was just a little girl in Louisiana sitting between her mother's knees, getting her hair combed, braided, and pulled into the tight styles so many black girls know too well. For years, she followed the script: chemical relaxers, hot combs, anything to make her curls lie flat. Then, in her 20s, she reached a quiet breaking point. The burns, the breakage, the constant message that straight was better wore her down. She stopped relaxing, did the big chop, and decided to see what her real hair could do. She had no idea it would grow into a perfect planet-sized afro that would shock the entire internet. When Guinness World Records first measured her afro, its circumference was already over a meter. Years later, at her most recent record, that halo of hair wrapped a tape measure to about 165 centimeters around, rising close to 25 centimeters high, and stretching more than 26 centimeters across. Imagine a medium-sized yoga ball made of hair. That's how massive it is. In pictures, her head looks like the center of a dark cloud-like sunburst, each coil reflecting light. People online argue in the comments about whether it's a wig, a Photoshop trick, or some kind of prop. It's not. Every coil, every strand is hers, grown slowly with conditioner patience and stubborn self-love. Of course, wearing a record-breaking afro isn't just about taking cool photos. Simple errands become mini-events. Evan has to angle herself going through doorways so her hair doesn't slam into the frame. Car headrests are the enemy. Leaning back in a cinema seat or airplane chair can flatten the shape she's spent hours picking out. Windy days will try to rearrange her entire existence. Wash day is like a part-time job, detangling, cleansing, deep conditioning, and then carefully shaping the fro can easily fill an afternoon. Even finding hats is an adventure. Most of them don't go on her head so much as sit politely on top. But for Avon, the afro isn't just a spectacle, it's a statement. In a world that has policed black hair for generations, she represents the opposite of shrinking to fit in. Her body part that grew too big for beauty standards became her crown, her brand, her way of telling other black women and girls, your natural self can be more than enough. It can be extraordinary. People look at her and cannot believe that much hair is real. She smiles, shakes out the massive halo around her face, and proves with every perfectly picked coil that it absolutely is. Simone Williams. Before the cameras and headlines, Simone Williams was just another young woman in Brooklyn trying to make rent and figure out adulthood. She worked in fashion and finance, counted every dollar, and like many black women, spent a small fortune straightening her hair. Around 23, she decided to stop the endless salon visits so she could save for her first apartment. That practical choice, let it grow and see what happens, quietly set her on a path the world would later struggle to believe. 9 years later, the coils that once hid under flat irons had expanded into a full-blown phenomenon. A natural afro so large it didn't just turn heads, it rewrote the record books. When Guinness World Records measured her hair in December 2020, the numbers sounded almost unreal. Simone's afro stood about 20.5 centimeters tall, stretched 22.5 centimeters across, and wrapped a tape measure at 1.48 palms in circumference, roughly 4 feet, 10 in around. That's not just big hair. That's an entire silhouette. On screen, the afro frames her face like a dark, perfectly rounded halo, a soft explosion of tight curls radiating in every direction. Comment sections routinely fill with skeptics insisting it must be a wig or some digital trick. But every strand is attached to the same scalp that once endured chemical burns and sizzling hot combs. Of course, living inside a record-breaking crown comes with a price. Hats are mostly history. Most of them just perch awkwardly on top. Doorways and low tree branches are hazards she has to scan for automatically. She washes her hair weekly or bi-weekly, then waits hours, sometimes most of a day, for it to air dry because she avoids heat that could damage her curls. Detangling is a workout conditioner, wide-tooth combs, careful sectioning, all done with the patience of someone who understands that haste equals breakage. Even something simple, like leaning back against a chair, can squash the shape she's spent so long picking and fluffing into that perfect globe. What makes Simone's story fit a title like Body Parts so huge? The world can't believe they're real isn't just the size of her hair, it's what she's turned it into. She openly credits other natural hair pioneers for inspiring her, and now she's become that figure for thousands of people around the world. Messages arrive from places she's never visited, women and girls saying her afro gave them courage to put down the relaxer to walk into work with their coils unapologetically visible. To some, her hair looks exaggerated, almost cartoonish in its scale. To Simone, it's a living connection to her ancestry, a symbol of black beauty stretched beyond acceptable limits and into something epic, undeniable, and entirely her own. Amir Manuel Mendez. In a crowded hallway at a California high school, there's one student you can spot instantly, long before you see his face. A vast, perfectly rounded cloud of hair rises above the sea of heads, a dark halo that looks too big to be real. That's Amir Manuel Mendez from Anaheim, the teenager who holds the Guinness World Record for the largest afro on a living male. When his hair is fully picked out, it measures about 19.67 centimeters high, 24.83 centimeters wide, and an incredible 226 centimeters, around more than 7 feet of circumference. For most people, big hair is a joke. For Amir, it's a measurable fact. The funny part is he never set out to become a record breaker. A few years ago, he simply stopped cutting his hair and let his natural texture grow. After a while, he realized his curls were expanding faster than his classmates. One day, he looked up the existing afro record and thought, "Wait, I might actually beat this." He grabbed a ruler, combed his hair out, did the math, and realized he wasn't just close, he was past it. That discovery turned a regular high school freshman into an official world record holder, with his mom sending in the application and Guinness confirming what his reflection had already told him. Of course, walking around with a record-sized afro rewrites the rules of daily life. In class, Amir usually has to sit in the back so the students behind him can still see the board. Strangers stare, point, and ask the same 3 questions over and over. How long have you been growing it? How do you take care of it? And is it heavy? He keeps most of the time his hair in twists to protect it regularly, oils his scalp, and uses leave-in products and dry shampoo to keep it fresh without constantly soaking it. Combing must be done patiently and preferably when it's damp, otherwise the pain is on a different level. Even something as simple as putting on a hoodie becomes an interaction between fabric and a very serious afro. What makes Amir perfect for a title like Body Parts So Huge? The world can't believe they're real isn't only the size of his hair but the way he talks about it. He sees his afro as a gift and a megaphone, a way to tell other black kids with textured hair to stop hiding and start celebrating what they were born with. Outside of the spotlight, he's just a teenager chasing good grades, dreaming about playing college football and talking about becoming a virologist someday. But wherever he goes, his hair gets there first. Turning heads, starting conversations, and proving that sometimes the thing that makes you stand out the most is exactly what you're meant to lean into. Rudolph Martino. In Birmingham, Alabama, there's a man whose beard makes people stop mid-sentence. From a distance, it looks like a thick, dark rope resting against his chest. Up close, you realize it's not just a beard. It's a cascade of perfectly formed locks flowing all the way down to his waist. This is Rudolph Martino, the current Guinness World Record holder for the longest natural beard locks on a living person male. His facial hair stretches an incredible 1.06 meters or 3 feet 6, ingrown patiently over more than a decade, until it became longer than some people's entire upper body. Rudolph wasn't always the guy with the beard. He grew up loving music, dancing, and weightlifting, and later moved from California to Birmingham in 2015, blending West Coast energy with Southern roots. Somewhere along that journey, he started locking the hair on his head. Then an idea came to him. What if my beard matched, inspired by the holy men of India and Jamaican Rastafarians who had adopted similar styles? He decided to let his facial hair grow into long, thick locks of its own. What began as an experiment in self-expression slowly turned into a look so striking that even he couldn't quite predict where it would lead. Growing a beard that long isn't just about time, it's a full-time commitment. Rudolph moisturizes daily and washes his beard about every 2 weeks. A single wash can take half an hour to an hour, but the drying time is the real test, up to 2 or 3 days before every lock is completely dry. He sometimes tucks the beard into his shirt so it doesn't get caught in doors, chair wheels, or car doors. Reactions on the street swing between disbelief, curiosity, admiration, and the occasional side eye. In a place like Alabama, A tall black man in a turban and robe with over a meter of beard locks doesn't just walk into a room. He changes the atmosphere. For Rudolph, though, this isn't a gimmick or a dare. He talks about his hair the way others talk about faith. He compares it to a tree with roots, branches, leaves, and fruit, his beard representing strength, history, and the things he hopes to give back to the world. In a society that still stereotypes locked hair on black men as unprofessional or threatening, he has turned his too long, too much beard into a powerful symbol of cultural pride, spiritual depth, and the freedom to show up exactly as you are. His body part is so huge, people struggle to believe it's real, but to him it's simply the most honest version of himself he can wear. Francisco Domingo Joaquim. On the streets of Luanda, Angola, before the TV shows and certificates, Francisco Domingo Joaquim was just Chiquinho, the guy with the unbelievable party trick. Friends would bring newcomers over and whisper, "Show him! Show him!" Francisco would grin, take a breath, and then open his mouth so wide, people would physically flinch backward. News traveled from corner to corner. There was a young man whose jaw could stretch like rubber, whose smile looked like it had been drawn too big for his face. At first, it was just neighborhood legend, something you had to see in person to believe. Then someone filmed him on a phone, uploaded the clip, and the internet did what it does best: it turned a local myth into a global shock. When Guinness World Records decided to investigate, they flew him to Rome to settle the question once and for all. Under hard studio lights on an Italian TV show, Francisco stood calmly as officials brought out their measuring tools. He opened his mouth to the absolute limit, cheeks and lips pulled to the sides, and the tape measure stretched from corner to corner about 17 centimeters, nearly 6.7 inches. That's wider than many people's handspan. To drive the point home, he did the stunt that had made him famous back home. He took a standard soda can and slid it into his mouth sideways, the whole metal cylinder disappearing between his teeth like it was nothing. Behind that jaw-dropping trick is a body that behaves differently from everyone else's. As a teenager, Francisco realized that while his friends reached their pain limit quickly, his jaw just kept going. No surgery, no gimmicks, just naturally elastic tissue and a willingness to push it further. He started entering odd talent competitions, stuffing cups and bottles past his lips while stunned crowds roared. Off stage, he's quiet, almost shy, but in front of an audience, the performer appears a man who knows he's about to make you question what you thought a human face could do. When people see his photos for the first time, they assume it's Photoshop, a filter, or some carnival illusion. Then they watch the videos, the can sliding smoothly into that enormous mouth, the tape measure stretched across his cheeks, the mixture of laughter and disbelief from everyone around him, and the disbelief slowly melts into amazement. Francisco Domingo Joaquim is a perfect fit for a title like 15 Black People with Body Parts So Huge. The world can't believe they're real. His jaw didn't just win him a world record. It turned a boy from Luanda into living proof of just how strange and spectacular the human body can be. Annie Hawkins Turner, Norma Stitz. Long before the world knew her as Norma Stitz, Annie Hawkins Turner was a shy girl from Georgia who just knew something about her body was different. While other girls her age were only beginning to develop, her chest was already pulling her forward, stretching shirts, drawing stares and whispers in the school hallways. Doctors later named it gigantomastia, a rare condition where breast tissue keeps growing far beyond normal. But back then, it didn't feel like a medical term. It felt like embarrassment, unwanted attention, and a constant awareness that she could never just blend into a crowd. As she grew older, so did her chest, until no regular bra could hold her, and no clothing store had anything close to her size. Eventually, the numbers became so extreme they sounded like a joke. Annie's bra size was measured at 102 ZZZ, a combination of numbers and letters that barely seems real. Each breast is estimated to weigh around 38 kilograms, about as heavy as an 8-year-old child hanging from her chest all day, every day. That kind of weight doesn't just change how you look, it changes how you live. Her shoulders carved deep grooves from heavy straps digging into skin. Her spine and lower back screamed in protest. Basic movements like climbing stairs, bending over, or tying her shoes turned into careful negotiations with gravity. Doctors urged her more than once to consider reduction surgery as the obvious solution. Annie, however, didn't see herself as a problem to be fixed. In a world that constantly criticizes black women's bodies, too big, too loud, too much, she made a radical choice to own what she had. Taking on the stage name Norma Stitz, she stepped into the world of modeling and documentaries, presenting her extraordinary chest not as a freakish flaw, but as the centerpiece of her public persona. She learned how to pose, how to dress to support her frame, how to move with a kind of slow, deliberate grace that acknowledged her size without apologizing for it. The body part everyone stared at became the foundation of a career she controlled. That doesn't mean the struggle vanished. Pain, exhaustion, and practical challenges still follow her everywhere: airplane seats that don't fit furniture that isn't built for her proportions, strangers who forget she's a person before she's a spectacle. Yet Annie's story fits a title like 15 Black People with Body Parts So Huge, the World Can't Believe They're Real, because it goes beyond shock value. Her chest is undeniably enormous, almost unbelievable in scale, but the real impact lies in what she did with it. Instead of hiding, she stepped into the light and said, in effect, "This is my body. I decide what it means." Mikel Ruffinelli. Growing up in Los Angeles, Mikel Ruffinelli never imagined her body would one day make headlines around the world. As a young woman, she had a fairly average frame, curvy but not extraordinary. Then life happened. Marriage, 4 children, long days working and raising a family. With every pregnancy, especially after her 4th child, her shape shifted in a way doctors couldn't easily explain. Her hips didn't just get fuller. They kept spreading outward until the tape measure wrapped around them reached an unbelievable 8 feet, roughly 2.4 meters in circumference. That number alone sounds like a typo. 8 feet is the length of a standard sofa, the height of a small room the size of a billboard in human form. Photos of Mikel show a relatively normal upper body balanced on an astonishing lower half a waist that leads into hips so wide they spill over almost any chair thighs that seem to belong to a different scale entirely. When her pictures first hit the internet, comment sections exploded with accusations of Photoshop and editing tricks. But interviews, videos, and live appearances made one thing very clear: this was not digital magic. Her body really looks like that. Living with such extreme proportions affects almost every choice she makes. Standard chairs are too narrow, so she prefers sturdy benches or custom seating that won't tip or dig into her sides. Moving through doorways requires turning sideways and calculating angles. Clothes are a constant challenge. Nothing off the rack fits, so she often wears stretchy fabrics and dresses that can accommodate her shape. Airplane travel, tiny restaurant booths, cramped car seats, things designed for average bodies become puzzles she has to solve over and over. Her hips are not just a feature, they're a daily logistical factor. And yet Mikel refuses to let the world define her as a curiosity. She openly calls herself a plus-size woman and speaks about loving the body she has, not the one society says she should have. While some look at her and see something almost unreal, she sees a mother, a wife, a woman who still cooks, laughs, dances, and poses for the camera on her own terms. In a culture that constantly tells Black women to shrink, flatten, and disappear, Mikel's record-breaking hips fit perfectly under a title like 15 Black People with Body Parts. So huge the world can't believe they're real, because they force everyone to confront just how narrow their idea of normal really is. John William Bud Rogan. In the late 1800s, on a farm in Tennessee, a boy named John William Rogan was born to parents who had once been enslaved. For the first few years of his life, he looked like any other child running around the fields. Then, around the age of 13, something changed. His legs began to lengthen at a frightening speed. Year after year, he shot upward, passing his father, then the tallest men in town, then even the doorways and ceilings around him. By adulthood, people no longer described him as tall. They called him a giant. Standing an estimated 8 feet 9 inches, John William Bud Rogan would become the tallest African American ever recorded and one of the tallest humans in history. The growth that stunned everyone else came with a terrible price. Rogan developed what doctors now recognize as gigantism. His pituitary gland produced more growth hormone than his bones and joints could handle. His limbs stretched into unbelievable proportions, but his body couldn't support the weight. Eventually, his legs became so weak and deformed that he could no longer stand or walk. Instead of striding through town, he traveled seated on a custom-built goat-drawn cart, his enormous frame folded carefully into it. Children would run behind, half terrified, half fascinated by the silent man whose head seemed to float above the crowd. Despite his size, Rogan's voice was gentle and his temperament even more so. He hated the idea of being displayed as a circus freak and turned down offers from sideshows and traveling exhibitions that wanted to turn his body into a ticketed attraction. Instead, he stayed close to home, selling postcards, bearing his own image and making small drawings and crafts with his long, delicate hands. People came from miles away just to see him craning their necks upward as he sat under a tree or on his wagon. His legs so long they could barely be contained in a single photograph. His height looked impossible, like a trick of perspective, until you stood next to him and realized your entire torso reached only to his hip. By the time he reached his early 30s, the same body that had made him famous was also slowly killing him. Years of being unable to move freely led to severe joint problems, circulation issues, and complications that his era's medicine could not fix. When John William Bud Rogan died around 1905, it was as a man who had lived his whole adult life inside a body part. The world could hardly comprehend a skeleton stretched so far beyond normal that he became a living landmark. His story fits a title like 15 Black People with Body Parts So Huge the World Can't Believe They're Real, not just because of his astonishing height, but because of the quiet dignity with which he carried it in a time and place that barely saw him as fully human. Gabriel Estevão Mondlane. In the small town of Manjacaze in southern Mozambique, a boy named Gabriel Estevão Mondlane grew up like any other child until his body decided otherwise. For his first years, his height seemed unremarkable. Then, around late childhood, his growth began to accelerate. By 12, he was already taller than most grown men. By 16, he was towering around 2.3 meters, and by his late 20s, he would stand at an officially measured 8 feet 0.75 in about 2.46 meters tall. That made him not only the tallest man in Africa, but one of the very few people in all of medical history to verifiably reach 8 feet or more. His body had become a landmark, a human skyscraper in a country where most buildings still hugged the ground. The reason lay deep inside his head, an overactive pituitary gland flooding his system with growth hormone, pushing his bones and joints far beyond their limits. At first, his size brought fascination and opportunity. Local newspapers ran photos of the Manjacaze giant walking with his normal-sized mother, the image striking enough to circle the globe. Talent scouts and circus agents soon followed. Gabriel left the cashew factory where he had shelled nuts and joined a Portuguese circus touring as the gentle giant from Mozambique. Posters exaggerated his height, but they didn't need to stretch it much standing next to him. Most adults looked like children. Life, however, was never as simple as the posters suggested. With every extra centimeter, the strain on his body increased. His hips, knees, and ankles ached constantly. Cracked skin on his feet made every step painful. Ordinary tasks, finding a bed long enough, a doorway, high enough clothes that reached past his wrists, became a never-ending challenge. He often needed a cane, then more support just to move. Medical teams in the capital tried to study and ease his condition, but in a poor, newly emerging nation, There were limits to what they could do for a man whose skeleton had grown beyond anything they were trained to manage. By the late 1980s, Gabriel was officially recognized as the tallest living man on Earth, his name printed in record books and whispered with awe. Yet away from the cameras, he was still the same quiet Mozambican who had once walked the dusty streets with his mother, now fighting fatigue and fragile joints. A fall at home, something that might have been minor for an average-sized man, proved fatal, and he died in 1990. His story fits 15 black people with body parts, so huge the world can't believe they're real because his height truly did seem unreal. A black man from a small African town whose body stretched past the limits of normal, leaving the world both amazed and sobered by the cost of such extraordinary growth. Hussein Bisad. In the crowded streets of Burao in northern Somalia, Hussein Bisad stood out long before the world learned his name. As a child, he was taller than his classmates, but by his late teens, his body had surged into something far beyond big. He kept growing until he reached about 2.32 meters tall, 7 foot, 7.5 in, making him one of the tallest people on Earth and the tallest Somali known. His hands followed the same extreme pattern from wrist to the tip of his middle finger. Each one measures around 26.9 centimeters, 10.9 in. At shoe shops, there was no point even looking at the shelves. With feet reported around size 26-50 EU and a weight of about 210 kilos, he simply didn't fit into anything made for ordinary bodies. That extraordinary height hides a brutal backstory. Hussein grew up during the chaos of the Somali Civil War and the Izak genocide in the north. At one point, he was reportedly shot by government forces and eventually fled the country seeking safety in the UK as an asylum seeker. There, doctors finally put a name to what his body had been doing all these years. Pituitary gigantism, most likely caused by a tumor on the tiny gland behind his eyes. The tumor pushed his body to keep producing growth hormone long after normal development should have stopped stretching. His skeleton widening his hands, enlarging his organs, and taxing his heart and joints with every extra centimeter. In Britain, Hussein suddenly became a media sensation. Cameras loved the contrast, this quiet, soft-spoken Somali man folding himself into doorways, ducking under ceilings, standing next to average-height people who barely reached his chest. For a while, he was billed as the tallest man in the UK and the man with the biggest hands in the world. Everyday life, though, was far from glamorous. Ordinary beds were too short. Clothes had to be custom-made. Public transport seats pinched his legs. Car rides meant contorting his frame into spaces never designed for someone his size. Even medical care was complicated. Special equipment, reinforced chairs, dialysis machines adjusted for his sheer bulk. Yet even with a body part so oversized, people struggle to believe it's real. Hussein's story is more than a sideshow. He has spoken about the loneliness of standing out so dramatically, about children staring and adults snapping photos without asking about the health problems that come with such an extraordinary frame. At the same time, he has become a kind of symbol for Somalis worldwide, a man from a war-torn region who survived, found refuge, and remained gentle in a body that looks like it belongs to a giant in a storybook. Under a title like 15 Black People with Body Parts So Huge, the world can't believe they're real. His enormous hands and towering height are the hook, but the person behind them is what really lingers. Brahim Taqiullah. In a small village in Morocco, a boy named Brahim Taqiullah grew up wondering why he was always the one outgrowing his school uniforms first. By the time he finished high school, the difference was no longer funny, it was staggering. His legs, arms, and torso kept stretching upward until he reached around 2.46 meters, or just over 8 feet tall, making him one of the tallest men on the planet. But if his height is astonishing, his feet are what truly push him into the realm of the unbelievable. Brahim holds the world record for the largest feet on a living person. One measures about 38.1 centimeters in length, the other roughly 37.5 centimeters. Most shops don't even make shoes that big. His body isn't slightly outside the norm. It lives in a completely different category. Doctors eventually discovered the cause, a tumor on his pituitary gland that pumped his body full of excess growth hormone. While other teenagers' bones had long since stopped lengthening, Brahim's kept on going, stretching joints, thinning skin, and putting immense pressure on his heart and spine. Once the tumor was finally treated, the runaway growth slowed, but the damage and the size remained. Standing next to him, an average-height adult looks like a child. His hand swallows theirs. His stride covers double the distance. Photos of him online are met with the same reaction every time. That can't be real. Then another picture appears. Then a video, and disbelief slowly turns into stunned acceptance. Daily life for Brahim is a constant negotiation with a world built for smaller bodies. Door frames are too low, so he instinctively ducks, entering almost any room. Standard beds leave his feet hanging far over the edge. Elevator ceilings, bus interiors, airplane aisles, none of them were designed for someone whose head brushes the top. Finding shoes was once a genuine crisis. For years, he wore improvised sandals or footwear pieced together from multiple pairs, until a specialist finally crafted custom shoes that could carry his enormous feet without tearing apart. Even simple pleasures like going to the cinema or sitting in a cafe require scouting out spaces where he can fit without contorting himself. Today, Brahim lives in France and works at an amusement park, greeting visitors as the gentle giant of the grounds. Children stare up at him in open-mouthed awe. Adults ask for photos, unable to resist standing beneath someone who looks like he stepped out of a fairy tale. Under a title like 15 Black People with Body Parts So Huge the World Can't Believe They're Real, he fits perfectly. His feet are literally off the charts, his height nearly impossible to comprehend, yet his demeanor is soft-spoken, even modest. In a world obsessed with extremes, he turns his extraordinary body into something disarming, rather than frightening. A reminder that behind the biggest measurements you'll ever hear is simply a man trying to move through a too-small world with as much grace as he can. Ella Madame Aboma Williams. Ella Williams entered the world in the American South around 1865, just as the Civil War was ending and slavery was being abolished. She was born to parents who had lived part of their lives in chains, and like many black girls of that era, her early years were spent in domestic work, caring for white families' children and keeping house. For a while, nothing about her seemed destined for legend, until her body began to change. In late adolescence, she started to shoot upward. While other women stopped growing, Ella kept rising, her legs stretching into astonishing columns of bone and muscle. By adulthood, she was so far above the women around her that strangers stopped in their tracks. When showmen discovered her, they gave her a new identity, Madame Aboma, the African Giantess. Posters advertised her as the tallest woman on Earth, often claiming heights of 8 or even 9 feet, numbers designed to sell tickets as much as tell the truth. Modern researchers comparing photographs and contemporary reports suggest she was likely a little over 2 meters tall, still vastly taller than most women of her time, and towering over nearly everyone in a crowd. On stage, she appeared in elegant gowns or African-inspired costumes flanked by normal-sized performers who barely reached her chest. Her arms looked impossibly long, her stride swallowed distance in a few steps, and her presence filled entire rooms the moment she entered. Unlike many so-called freak show exhibits, Ella carried herself with an air of dignity that audiences remembered. She traveled across Britain, Europe, South America, the Caribbean, and Australia, riding trains and steamships at a time when most black women in America never left their home counties. She learned to pose for photographs, to smile just so, to lean slightly so people could fit in the frame beside her. Offstage, though, the practical reality of her size never disappeared. Beds were too short. Doorways too low, clothes had to be specially tailored. She endured the constant mix of gawking admiration and exoticizing racism that came with being billed as the African giantess in a world already obsessed with turning black bodies into spectacle. Under a title like 15 Black People with Body Parts So Huge the World Can't Believe They're Real, Madame Oboma belongs near the top of the list. Her extraordinary height made her look almost unreal in an era before camera tricks and digital editing, and yet she was very real, a black woman using the one thing the world could not ignore, her towering body, to carve out a livelihood on her own terms. Crowds came to stare at her impossibly long frame. What they met instead was a person who turned that amazement into agency, standing quite literally above the narrow expectations placed on women who looked like her. And that's where we'll leave this chapter of 15 Black People with Body Parts So Huge the World Can't Believe They're Real. Behind every shocking measurement is a human being negotiating pain, pride, survival, and identity in a world built for average. Some turned their differences into power, others into quiet resistance, all of them expanding what we think black bodies can be. But here's the question for you: are they being celebrated or consumed as spectacle? Drop your thoughts in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe to Legends of Black Excellence for more stories the world can't stop talking about.